Good to see y'all. I am Rhett. I hope y'all are having a good time so far. I want to encourage you, if you get really restless at any point, feel free to get your wiggles out. There are restrooms out the door and on either side right there. And I've already tested them and they work great. So that's great. Yeah, so what I will be talking about is Moses and money. So essentially, in the Old Testament, when God gives the law to his people, in, books like Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, the laws that God gives to his people in the Old Testament, what can we learn from those? But before we jump into that, we kind of have to get a feel for how do you even get something useful out of the Old Testament as Christians? Some of the laws are really confusing and hard to know what to do with. Don't shave the corner of your beard. Don't know what to do with that. Don't boil a goat in its mother's milk is a law in Leviticus. I haven't had the opportunity, right? And so some of them are just hard to know what to do with. And then some of the laws, much more problematically, seem just downright barbaric and oppressive. They talk about things like slavery or things like really intense punishments for things. And so, the ones that we don't know what to do with, we ignore. The ones that we are scared of make us want to ignore the whole thing. And even when we get past that, I think I hear a lot of Christians not take any notice in books like Leviticus because they say, oh, well, we're under the new covenant, right? Aren't we under the new covenant? Did Paul not write the letter to the church in Galatia saying, if anyone tells you that you have to be circumcised to be saved, let them be anathema, let them be under God's curse. Did that not happen? And so I'm going to start out by real quick addressing the part of us that wants to just ignore this because, we don't follow this law anymore. First things first, when you read the words of Jesus, Matthew 5, as he's giving the Sermon on the Mount, he tells people, I didn't come to abolish the law, but to fulfill it. Which tells me that Jesus can help us understand the law, and the law can help us understand Jesus, which is helpful. And of course, Jesus says that the summary of all of these laws is love the Lord your God with all of your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. And so there's principles somewhere in here that we need to hold on to. In John 1, also in the New Testament, the author who's introducing the whole story of Jesus says, and this is one of your focus on Jesus verses, out of his fullness we have all received grace in place of grace already given. For the law came through Moses, grace and truth came through Jesus. And so he's referring to the law that was given through Moses by God to his people as a grace, as a gift, right? So this law is a gift. And then you even see, as Brandon mentioned, Paul in his letters continues to quote from the law, right? In Ephesians 6, he's like, children, obey your parents so that you may live long in the land that God gives you. It's the first command with a promise, right? And there he's quoting from Exodus. Or, as Brandon also quoted, 2 times, both in 1 Corinthians and 1 Timothy, Paul, when he's saying that, hey, it would be wise and fair to support the people who look out for you spiritually, he says, don't muzzle an ox while it's treading out the grain. Namely, that was this really specific old law they had. The idea was you have these oxen kind of pushing around this millstone, treading out the grain, and you need to let them eat if they get hungry. Right? The people who are doing things for you, let them experience the fruit of their labor. So yeah, it seems like there are principles that hold in the New Testament, even as we enter a new covenant. And I think what's a helpful way to, a helpful way to think about this is that the law gives us boundaries, but not ideals. Right? Scripture is a story of God meeting real people who are from real cultures and real points in history where they're at, and then moving them onto his agenda. And we're still not all the way on his agenda thousands of years later. And so we can't expect that these kind of first steps that God's taking with his people are immediately going to be the ideal. In Galatians, Paul compares the law to sort of like a schoolmaster or a guardian who, I mean, you can imagine like a teacher of kindergartners, and it's kind of like, I'm here so that they don't die, like so that they don't like kill each other, stab each other with crayons. Like, that's what I'm here for, right? And so I think in a lot of ways, the law was there because these are people who were enslaved by Egyptians and then were going into this country where, as Brandon mentioned, people were sacrificing children to false gods. So these are people who have not seen good community ever, right? And so God's trying to give them these boundaries to protect them. And then I think another way we can think about this is discerning the structures from the signposts. That's your blank there. Structures versus signposts. And what I mean by that is there are parts of these laws, the really specific parts. Don't muzzle an ox while it's treading out the grain. That's a structure. That's kind of the details of the law. And then the signpost or the principle about God that it's pointing to is care for the people who work for you, right? So I might tell someone, hey, if you borrow my basketball, don't dribble it in the parking lot. That's the structure. The signpost that it's pointing to is respect other people's belongings. When I banded together with my brothers in 2006 and purchased a Nintendo Wii in a parking lot of a McAllister's for $80 above retail, and then we took it home and started to play video games on it, and my parents said, y'all better play multiplayer games, that's a lot of structure. You're probably like, what is he talking about? The whole lesson of that was share, right? Like... And so it can be easy to get caught up in the minutia, in the details. And so I'm going to hopefully help us see where these signposts are pointing us. And one huge difference is that they didn't have money when they were brought out of Egypt. This was an agrarian society. Yeah, you don't say, oh, I got 5 wheat from the bank today, right? Like you weren't, investing in millet, So, like a lot of these laws are going to be referring to what do you do with your cattle, with your household, with your grain. And by the time Jesus shows up, the tabernacle has been replaced with the temple, and grain and things like that have been replaced with money by then, because they're in a new empire. So I think I feel comfortable applying those rules to money because the Jews did so themselves. So what does God care about? What is he pointing his people to? We're about to jump into these principles. And one thing I want to note is because these were laws not just given to individuals, but to whole communities, we're going to be getting into things that feel like politics. And if at any point you find yourself thinking like, he sounds too woke, or he sounds too conservative, ask yourself, is that Rhett talking and misrepresenting the Bible, or is what I'm feeling actually a distaste for God's heart, right? Because if it's the first one, then spit it out, right? Like if it's me saying something that's not God, then get rid of it. But if it's just that you don't like what God says, then that's something you need to wrestle with. All right, so principle number 1. Give God your first and your best. Give God your first and your best. A lot of times, we think about the laws that were around regarding generosity. And as Brendan mentioned, a lot of Christians they grow up thinking about the tithe. And we get kind of obsessed with it. I think, we think like, okay, I have to give 10% of my money. And it's kind of this like, if I give 10%, I'm in heaven, 11%, doing too much. 9%, hell, right? Like it's like, we do this weird thing. And as he mentioned, first of all, the tithe really equated to like 23 1/3% of your grain. So what do you do with that? And then second of all, there were a bunch of kinds of offerings. There were fellowship offerings, sin offerings, thank offerings, wave offerings, all these different types of offerings. So generosity was not so simple as a checkbox. which maybe means that God wants us to think more about generosity, to write it on our hearts more. So there's this principle of giving God your first that even comes down to when you have your first child. This is Exodus 22. He says, "You must give me the firstborn of your sons. Do the same with your cattle and sheep." And obviously, God's not commanding child sacrifice here. So what they would do, they would take their firstborn child, take them to the tabernacle, and actually sacrifice an animal, redeem their firstborn with a lamb. But it was kind of this thing saying, God has given me something of so much value, and I know it's not mine. Like kids would not be mine. The idea that my family could continue to exist is not a given. That comes from God, so I'm going to thank him for that. The same thing applied to grains. Like anytime a new harvest came in, you would give the first fruits of that harvest, and the priest would take it and wave some of it, and then you would sacrifice a burnt offering. But again, it was this idea that giving is not this thing where I get all the stuff I want, and then I think about giving. It's the first thing on my mind is this isn't mine, so I'm going to thank God for it. And the idea of giving God your best shows up everywhere. Anytime they were supposed to sacrifice an animal, it was supposed to be a ram without defect. A ram without defect, spotless, right? The first time I read Leviticus, I was like 6. I don't know what I was doing. And my mom's like, what are you getting from Leviticus? And apparently I like rolled my eyes and I was like, a ram without defect, a ram without defect, a ram without defect. Because the law repeats that over and over again. And I think the idea is don't give God your throwaway stuff. Give him what's good. I think, like imagine if while we were eating at Pizza Theology, I came up to you and I was like, got a little crust for you. You wouldn't be like, you've thought about me a lot. This cost you something. Your heart is overflowing with generosity. You'd be like, what? It's almost worse than nothing, Yeah, so don't give God and other people your leftovers, right? Like don't check off all your boxes, and when you finally are happy with every part of your life, you have all the clothes you want, you have the perfect home, then start thinking about generosity. No, I give God and others my first and my best. Principle number 2. Share responsibility. Share responsibility. Here is actually where the idea of the tithe comes in. Numbers 18, he says, I give to the Levites all the tithes in Israel as their inheritance in return for the work they do while serving at the tent of meeting. So the grains and later on the money that all the tribes of Israel brought in actually fed an entire tribe of the nation. Like a 1/12 of their population subsisted purely on these offerings. And these offerings took care of a bunch of things. The Levites, they were in charge of the temple, in charge of these sacrifices. But when you read through the law, it's not just those things. Like they're also, in some ways, in charge of the justice system, like when there's disputes. And in other ways, they're in charge of the healthcare system, like looking at a spot on the skin and determining, is this something that's going to kind of take care of itself? Could it infect someone else? Like they're in charge of that. They're in charge of all sorts of different things. In a lot of ways, the arts are entrusted to them. So we see God commanding his people to all band together and give some of what they have into the temple, and then the temple is taking care of all of these needs. So, and not everyone benefits from them the same amount. And that is basically taxes and insurance in our world, right? It's all of us together giving some of what we have so that these needs that otherwise would not get taken care of can be taken care of, right? Roads, libraries, public schools, all these different things. And I think with taxes and insurance, it can be so easy to complain and to say no, I'm not going to pay my taxes. And I know in a room with this many people, there's a lot of people here who habitually, literally commit tax fraud. Like so many people, I don't know what to tell you, so many people don't pay their taxes. And I think we justify that by saying, oh, like the government doesn't spend my money well. You know, the government doesn't glorify God with how they spend my money. First of all, it's not our money. Second of all, I was talking to Brandon. He worded it so well. He's like, you know, I don't think God's pleased with how the government spends their money, but I don't think he's pleased with how I spend my money all the time. And he spends his money better than I spend mine. But like, yeah, I think, you know, we can't demand perfection from these people who provide for all these needs when we're not giving it ourselves, right? So insurance is us sharing risk. Taxes are us all joining together to kind of make a society possible. Is it perfect? No. But are we? No. Principle number 3. Look out for those who can't look out for themselves. Look out for those who can't look out for themselves. In Leviticus 23, you know, God says, when you reap the harvest of your land, don't reap to the very edges of your field or gather the gleanings of your harvest. Leave them for the poor and the foreigner residing among you. I am the Lord your God. And I love that God attaches his authority and his character to this command. He says, doing this is part of how you can be my people. This is the kind of thing I do. And this command to not gather to the edges is repeated a lot of times throughout the law, which I don't think is an accident. But the lesson is live below your means so that you can help people who are struggling. Our God literally chose to experience hunger and suffering and homelessness to share the riches of his inheritance with us. Right? That's literally what Jesus did. And what do you think it says to him when I refuse to experience any kind of inconvenience or discomfort or lack of getting my way in order to help his children? Right? What does that say to him? And I think, again, it can be so easy to not be generous or not give to charities because, oh, like homeless people misspend money or charities misuse money. The solution to bad or ineffective giving isn't greed. The solution to bad giving is better giving, right? Don't mock people from the sidelines when you're not helping anyone. Leviticus 25 says that if any of your fellow Israelites become poor or are unable to support themselves among you, help them as you would a foreigner or a stranger so they can continue to live among you. Don't take any interest or profit from them, but fear your God so they can continue to live among you. I want to note here the foreigners that God is saying to take care of probably would have come from Egypt, the nation that was enslaving them, or from the Canaanites, the nation that sacrificed babies. And I want to ask you, if God told people with less belongings and less security than we do to take care of people who are that dangerous to them, do you think he's going to let us off the hook for not taking care of immigrants here? I just want to submit that to you to think about. I'm not saying it's a simple thing, but I am saying that when we defund like organizations that help refugees, I don't think that looks like God's heart. God cares about protecting the vulnerable in our nation, but also in all nations. Principle 4, be fair and honest. That's supposed to be like scales, like that are balanced, but I don't know what it looks like. Be fair and be honest. Leviticus 19, this one's quick. He says, don't defraud or rob. Don't hold back the wages of a hired worker overnight. So if you've got someone who's equivalent of living paycheck to paycheck, get them their paycheck on time so they can feed their family, right? Be fair. And then later on in 19, he says, use honest scales. Like when you're selling, don't misrepresent things to people. He says when you sell land, don't oversell how productive the land is. Like if you know you had a bad harvest, don't say you had a good one so you can get more money. This is all to say that God is a God of truth. And that doesn't just apply to our words, it applies to our finances. And I would encourage you to start practicing being people of truth, not just with your finances right now, but also in your schoolwork. I think it's something that's kind of snuck into our culture as a ministry that like we all cheat a little, right? On our homework. Like we all like use AI a little more than we should, right? And I just want to challenge you, like, I don't think that you're teaching yourself to be honest with your money later if you do that kind of thing. Principle number 5, raise the floor, lower the ceiling. Anyone who knows me knows I love talking about ceilings and floors, like all the time. I don't know why. What I mean by that is the floor would be like the lowest poverty in the nation, and the ceiling would be the heights of riches in the nation. And you can see that God puts things in place to raise the level of the lowest poverty and lower the level of the highest wealth. He closes that wealth gap. And this was what Brandon was talking about earlier, the year of Jubilee. So every 7 years, they would have a Sabbath year where someone who was a slave or a hired servant working for someone's household would be released and given the money they need to kind of get off on a good foot. And then every 50 years, so every 7 Sabbath years, they would do the year of Jubilee. And this was supposed to be this joyful celebration in which anyone who had like accumulated, 100 acres of land would go back to the 10 or whatever that their family originally had. And anyone who only had like 1 acre would get 10 again. You would return, you would reset, right? So a family stuck in a cycle of generational poverty. Like let's say someone in your family got injured and was not able to farm. That can only really go for a generation of poverty or so before reset, you have an equal chance. And anyone who has been building up their wealth more and more and more, that can only happen for so long before it resets. And I want you to imagine, what would it look like in our country if we had a year of Jubilee? I don't think most of us want that. I think most of us, if we had a year of Jubilee, most of us in this room would end up with less after that. Most of us are the beneficiaries of generational wealth, not all of us. I want to encourage you, there's this YouTube channel called Soft White Underbelly. Yeah, and it's about kind of the people that society ignores. And so this guy interviews prostitutes and fentanyl addicts and people from the Appalachian Mountains in these towns that have been totally forgotten by the government. And you can kind of see what it looks like to just be stuck in generational poverty. And I want you to watch that and imagine what would happen if we just reset. But sadly, we don't do that as Americans. We glorify the kind of climb to get more. And as Brandon mentioned, the Israelites did not do that. And when God sends his prophets to kind of check their homework and tell them whether or not they're living up to God's heart and God's standard, one of the biggest things that he harps on is, he says in Isaiah 5, "Woe to you who join house to house until you live alone in the land. Your houses will testify against you." In Amos, he says, "You sell the needy for a pair of slippers." Right? Like they didn't get this vision, and that was a huge reason why God ended up having them kicked out of the land. Principle number 6. That's the year of Jubilee. Principle number 6, splurge together. It's a funny sounding word. Basically, what I mean is like, go all out. Be extravagant together. The Israelite calendar was marked by feasts. So every year there were 7 feasts. And I've got the names of them listed there. And definitely these holidays and these feasts had religious meaning. There would be sometimes times of fasting, of prayer, of sacrifice, of singing, things like that. But also, most of them were marked by a lot of dancing and celebrating and wine and good food. There's this moment in Nehemiah 8 where, Israel has come back from exile for like the second or third time, and they're rebuilding the city and they're rebuilding the temple. And it's kind of this moment of like recognizing we have failed to follow the law, we're restarting. and they read the law all together, and the people are weeping because they know, like, we've missed the vision. And it says that Nehemiah said, "Go and enjoy choice food and sweet drinks. Send some to those who have nothing prepared. This day is holy to the Lord. Don't grieve, for the joy of the Lord is your strength." And it says they went away and they ate and drank and they celebrated with great joy. I just want y'all to think about the God who commanded some really intense laws also commanded celebration. And the times where they did the most kind of like spending their money, the times where they took the most financial risk, when they treated themselves the most, was with each other and with God. And I don't know about y'all, but I like to treat myself, right? Like if I ever do something financially risky, it's usually as a treat for me, right? And I think sometimes it's okay to treat yourself, you know? Like that can be okay to do, but I think it means something about God that he said, I want you to be most extravagant with each other. And I want you to have the most fun while you're celebrating each other and me. Right? That the high points of your life, the times where you were the happiest and most joyful, the times where you were the most willing to spend, were with the people of God. I think that means something. My grandpa, when I was growing up, he's 91 now and still kicking, which is incredible. But when I was growing up, I think as he got into his 70s and 80s, he started every year to take our family on these like pretty nice vacations. And at the time I would like add up how much the vacation cost in my head and be like, really? Like, I mean, my cousin's not gonna remember this. And he kind of just like sucks in general. Like he doesn't deserve that, right? But he would do it every year. And sometimes we would, go to a different state. A couple times it was a cruise. But it was this extravagant thing for this extended family. And then every night we would get together and have a devotional. But I look back and I see, this was a man who worked for 70 years nonstop to build up wealth, and then he chose to spend it on community. And he chose that in that community we would celebrate God together. And so some of my best memories I have from growing up are being together and being with God. I think that's really cool. Final principle, number 7, live a Sabbath lifestyle. Look at that Snorlax looking face. That's a Pokemon. Live a Sabbath lifestyle. So the Sabbath, the idea of working 6 days and then resting on the 7th, is commanded multiple times throughout Scripture. I mean, the first time we see it is after God creates for 6 days and then rests on the 7th, which I can't even fathom what it means for God to rest. But he commands it in Exodus 20, Leviticus 23, and then I think more times than that. And the two reasons he gives for resting on the 7th day is, one, God rested, and we're made in his image, so we're meant to rest as well. And then two, these were people that he had delivered from slavery who were kind of told, your value, your validity as human beings is not in who you are or who you belong to, but in what you can produce, right? Like, how valuable are you? How many bricks have you baked for me lately, right? And God says, no, that's not true. So I want you to rest. I want you to remember you're not a slave. You're not a slave to money. You're not waking up every day with no value and then working so that you can have some value, right? That's not who you are. And I think our lives today are marked by a lot of really stressed out, frantic work, and then a lot of ineffective personal entertainment time. So we don't really work well, but when we're working, we're doing it so that we can rest more. And a lot of people look forward to retirement, which is like, okay, I want to completely abandon being productive for 6 days a week, and then I want to like rest for the rest of my life. And by rest, I mean like post conspiracy theories on Facebook. You know, I think that's what retirement is. Yeah, and so no, God says no. Like your life needs to be marked by this rhythm of really spending your energy well and productively and creating order and abundance, and then also resting and remembering that's not my value, and God's the one who's in control. He's the one who's providing. And they would have Sabbath days, but they also had Sabbath years. I mentioned that earlier. Leviticus 25 says, sow your fields for 6 years and your vineyards and gather their crops, but in the 7th year, rest. It's a Sabbath to the Lord. Do not sow your fields or prune your vineyards. And I can't imagine what it would have been like to rest for a year. I'm sure they did productive things. There were still kids to look out for, food to prepare. Like it wasn't like they didn't have Netflix. You know, they did productive things, and I'm sure they rested well. But I hear from a lot of people in our community, and there's no judgment in me mentioning this, but I hear things like, I don't know how to be on vacation. I hate being sick because I feel like I have to be doing something, right? And I think that God wants to set us free from that. But sometimes in order for him to set us free from this attitude, this deeply ingrained belief that I have to be working, I have to be hustling, sometimes in order for him to do that, we have to trust him and be obedient to start resting, like doing the rest, and then letting him teach us how to be restful, right? I think it takes faith. It takes saying like, all right, I'm going to try this. Remember, Jesus says, my yoke is easy and my burden is light. And he commands his disciples to do a lot of really hard things. But then he also commands them to just trust that he's the one working. We're the ones who invent hustle culture. So yeah, there are 7 principles from the laws. I would encourage you, there are certain chapters that came up a lot in those verse references. Exodus 20, Leviticus 19, Leviticus 25, ones like that. Ones that you saw multiple times, I would encourage you to go and read those chapters, seek them out, and see what you can learn from them.